Hey guys, it's Gwen. If you love what you hear, there are a few ways you can help us during Season 2. First, don't forget to subscribe to the Fresh Fiction Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, or any of your other favorite podcast apps. Rating, reviewing, and sharing the podcast with your friends helps us out more than you'll ever know. Sharing is caring, as they say. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram as Real Vixen. I'm back with a brand new episode today. It's a little bit different than our previous episodes, as you'll see. This one actually features one of my book clubs. Every single month, our group gets together and we interview an author and we have a great meal and we just chat about all the books we're reading right now. It's one of my absolute favorite parts of my month, and I'm so excited that I get to share one of these evenings with you. Throughout the rest of the season, you're going to be seeing and listening, not really seeing because it's not a visual thing, but you're going to be hearing a few more of these book club dinners, and there'll be some authors that you've heard of and some authors that you haven't. That's one of the great things about our book club. So hopefully you'll keep tuning in, and until then, I hope you enjoy our first one with Liz Johnson, the author of A Sparkle of Silver. Well, Liz, if you don't mind, can you just introduce yourself to the group real fast?
Sure, I'd love to. As you all know, I'm Liz Johnson, and I have been writing for, the last almost 10 years now. I actually finished my first novel in 2008, and it took quite a while for me to get that ready to be published, and but I was very thankful to work with a great publisher, and I wrote for Love Inspired Suspense for a number of years, and then a couple of years ago, I had a story idea set on Prince Edward Island, and I knew that I was going to need a different publisher for that, and so I am very grateful that I've been writing with REVELL publishers for, I guess, since 2016. My first book came out with them, so it's been a joy, and I've loved writing with them. So A Sparkle of Silver is book number 15 for me.
Oh, wow.
And in my day job, I'm a marketing manager. I've worked in publishing for 10 years. I've worked in entertainment marketing and just, kind of all sorts of marketing. So I love to do that in my day job, and I always tell people, do what I say, not what I do, because I'm good at it in my day job, but my night job is basically writing, so I don't get to do as much marketing for myself as I would like to do sometimes. I have to just pick and choose what I can be able to do. So, so that's kind of my life, is writing and working, and I have 5 nieces and nephews, and I dote on them just as much as possible.
That's always fun. It's nice. That way you get to send them back.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So you are still, a nighttime writer. Like, you just have to kind of write when you have the time to do so.
That's right. Yeah, it's been like that since I started. But I actually kind of prefer that. I really like the interaction of having a day job. I like to be around other people, and I get ideas from them all the time. And not necessarily like people are showing up as characters in my books, but more just the idea that, just interactions that I'll see or that I'll experience. And a lot of those do end up in my books. And so I'm grateful for that. And being able to sort of think creatively in a different way during the day, during my day job, frees me up to think creatively for fiction writing as my night job. And so I write. People always ask how often do I write? Do I write every day? And the answer to that is no. I probably should, but I don't write every day unless I'm coming up on deadline, and then it's frantic and it's all out every minute that I'm available. I'm writing. But when I'm not on deadline, a couple times a week, a couple nights a week, and then some on the weekends, and that's a pretty steady pace for me and gets me through my books.
Yeah.
And that's what I was wondering. You find the discipline to write in, I guess, essentially kind of your off hours from your normal day job, when, so many of us sometimes after the day job is just the last thing we want to do is anything else besides just veg and read a book or something, right?
Yes, and I mean, I would be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy doing that. Like, I really enjoyed just taking time off and just reading a good book, or getting away from the quote unquote work stuff. But ultimately, I've always been a writer. Always since I was like 7. I wrote my first short story. And so when I was 27, well, a little younger than that, I was working with a friend, and I was telling her about this idea that I had for a book. And I was like, oh, but I'll never finish it. And she looked at me and she's like, yes, you will. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, she was so intense about it. And she started asking me every day, did you write last night? And I wanted to say yes, and I got tired of saying no. And so I finally just made a calendar for myself and said, okay, like, I can write 4 days a week. That's, 4 nights a week, I can set this aside. And so, like, I was pretty consistently writing, like, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays. And it was only like an hour a night, so it didn't take up all my time. I was still able to have a social life, but just having that sort of appointment and knowing that my friend Kelly was going to ask me the next morning if I had written made me write. and that's how I got through my first book. And I wrote that in 3 months, and then, it took a while longer to get it published. But that's, it was really just that accountability. And so I still do that a lot with writing friends, just to have a little bit of accountability. I have a writing group that I meet with every other Thursday, and we get together at a Panera Bread, and we have dinner together, and we sit and chat and catch up and talk about writing stuff and what's going on in your lives. And none of us write in the same genre. We all kind of write very different stuff, but then we sit and we write together for an hour on our own projects. We don't talk to each other during that hour. It's sort of understood that this is just writing time. And it's amazing just to have that accountability. It's amazing how productive we can be in an hour when there's, we're not allowing other distractions, and we know that everybody else is committed to working during that time, so we are going to as well. So, yeah, it's been a really good thing for me, and I've done that with various friends and writers through the years, and that has always been a huge help for me.
Yeah, the accountability of that, I'm sure, is like, priceless, really.
Yes, for sure.
Liz, I actually had a question, because you mentioned that you started off writing romantic suspense for Love Inspired, but then with your REVELL books, they're more of, like, I would consider, they're romantic, but they're kind of women's fiction-y. I'm curious to see how you made that evolution in your writing.
Oh, that's a good question. It felt very natural to me to make that transition. And I think that that's because I was working on this story for so long. I was working on my first Prince Edward Island book. It's called The Red Door Inn. And I had Prince Edward Island stories in my mind since 2010. Little side note on that, little backstory. I grew up loving Anne of Green Gables because my mom introduced me to her when I was very young, and we watched all the movies. And then when I was in college, I read all the books. And my mom had always had her book set on the little shelf by her nightstand, and so I just grew up with Anne of Green Gables as part of my life. And so I told my mom at some point, I said, Mom, when I sell my first book, I'll take you to Prince Edward Island. And she laughed at me. And she says now she did not laugh, but she really did. I don't know if it was because she didn't think I would ever sell a book, which I had doubts about for a long time, or if she didn't think that I would spend my book money on her. But I just knew that that was something that I wanted to do. So I sold my first book in 2008, and I said, Mom, nobody ever tells you that you don't make any money on your first book. And she was like, oh, it's okay. But I said, Mom, I said, the next book, I'm going to take you. And she said, okay. So sure enough, I sold another book to Love Inspired the next year, and I took her to Prince Edward Island in 2010, and we spent 5 days there, and it was the most magical, most wonderful experience, and I just adored it. So, of course, we went back the next year, and then a couple years later, and so we've been back 4 times. But so I've always sort of had this Prince Edward Island in my blood since our first visit, and I knew that I wanted to write a story about really wounded hearts that were coming together, and that I found a lot of peace and healing on Prince Edward Island, and I thought that that would make for a great story. And so I was sort of, kind of putting these ideas for this story together, and for the Red Door Inn and the broken hearts that would come find their place there. And I knew that that wasn't a traditional love-inspired kind of storyline. And I knew that it wouldn't quite fit within their guidelines. And I knew that I wanted to make them longer stories and bigger stories. And so for all of those reasons, I started working with REVELL, and they were just incredible from the get-go, and just, believed in my stories, and were so excited about that, and about, taking fans and readers to Prince Edward Island, which has just been the delight of my, one of the delights of my life, is that people tell me that reading my books makes them want to go to Prince Edward Island. And I just feel like PEI needs to hire me for their tourism board, because I would be great. Everybody I tell, I think, everybody I talk to, I tell them to go to Prince Edward Island. It's worth it. So even though those stories tend to be a little bit more women's fiction-y, or, they have a little bit deeper, I'm going to use I guess the word wound. Like, they have deeper wounds that the characters are dealing with.
Yeah.
And I think that that's sort of maybe what elevates it beyond what's considered a quote-unquote traditional romance. But, I think that I just love romances and falling in love, too. So I will probably never write a story that doesn't include that, because I'm a hopeless romantic, and I totally adore when the hero and heroine get together. That's my favorite moment.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's what's really cool too, is when you can find an author that's able to balance the, this richer, more complex story, but then still give the readers what we want, which is our happily ever after, and these very satisfied characters.
Yes. Yes.
And then with Sparkle of Silver, you've actually moved us to Georgia. Can you talk a little bit about kind of moving away from Prince Edward Island and coming back to the States?
Sure.
For your story.
So it broke my heart. It broke my heart a little bit to leave Prince Edward Island, and I want to go back there. I hope to get to write there again someday. I fell in love with Georgia a couple years ago. My aunt, who just is such an amazing aunt, and we grew up being, very close. And so a couple years ago, she and her husband were traveling to St. Simon's Island, Georgia. And I was living in Nashville at the time, and she called me and said, "Hey, would you like to come for a visit?" And I looked at it, because I didn't know anything about St. Simon's Island, and I looked at the map, and I said, "Well, that's like a 9-hour drive. I really don't want to do that on my own." I said, "But what if I bring my best friend?" And she said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So my best friend and I hop in a car, and we book it from Nashville to St. Simon's, and we spent about 4 days there. And it was just such a sweet, lovely trip. And St. Simon's I felt like has a lot of similarities to Prince Edward Island, just in kind of the pace of the island. There's a gentleness there, just it doesn't feel hectic or frenzied, and there it just the rhythm and the motion of the water against the shores, but also just the people were so kind, and so they're very southern, and but very, very kind, and I just adored it. And so when it came time to talk about a new series with my publisher, I just said, where do I want to go? I want to go back to St. Simon's Island, and so they were on board with that, and I had this story idea for years in my back pocket, and it was always set in California, because in 2010, after I took my mom to Prince Edward Island, I felt really guilty that we didn't take my dad. I felt like really guilty. I was like, oh no. And my dad was cool about it, but at the same time I thought, I should do something with him. And I was going to Monterey, California for a writers conference. And so I called my dad and said, hey, what if you come spend a couple days with me after the conference? We'll go to the aquarium. We'll, go wherever, and we'll hang out in California for a couple days. And he said, oh, that'd be great. So he said the only thing he really wanted to do was he wanted to go to Hearst Castle. And I don't know if you all are familiar with Hearst Castle. It's right on the coast. Near San Simeon, California, kind of near Big Sur, San Luis Obispo area. And it's this giant castle that William Randolph Hearst built in the 1920s and 30s. And so we went on this night tour, and it was fascinating. I mean, it's so opulent. There's so much money just poured into this building. They have a swimming pool that has gold swimming pool tiles, gold tiles on the bottom of the swimming pool. And I'm just scratching my head going, who does that? Like, who has that kind of money? It was just so outside my realm of reality, this giant estate. But I immediately had a story idea. I immediately was like, we could tell a story here. And so that was kind of an idea that I had just been sitting in my pocket for a couple of years. And then when it came time to think about a new series, I wanted to go back and tell that story. And then I got really excited thinking about getting to tell it, kind of relocated to Georgia, but we still have this giant mansion, this chateau that is, just filled with the opulence of the late 1920s. And when, money was just sort of flowing and people didn't believe that anything bad could ever happen. And, nobody ever saw the stock market crash coming. But right before that, how were they living in the midst of prohibition? These are men who didn't even care about that. Like, they always had liquor flowing, and they always had, certain things going on. And they believed that they were sort of above the rules of society and of morality. And so I really wanted to tell that story, but at the same time tell it from a modern-day perspective, and a woman who is looking at her family's history and saying, what did her great-grandmother experience 90 years ago? And so that was just, for me, that was so much fun to get to explore, again, St. Simon's Island, but then also this idea that I had with my dad all those years ago.
Yeah, and I loved also like the little bit of the mystery in there as Millie is trying to figure out just exactly how her heritage ties back to this place. And I think that was really, it's just such a fun sort of, it goes back to what you were saying, the complexity of the characters.
Yes. I loved that part with Millie. And people often ask me what surprised me about writing this book. And the funny thing is that that's what surprised me was the way that the relationships all worked out at the end. I didn't see that coming. I didn't really know how I was going to end it. I didn't know if they were going to find the treasure. I didn't know if they were going to, if Millie was going to be able to find her history. I didn't know any of that or how any of it was going to play out. And so actually in the process of writing it, basically I got to the end and was like, well, something's got to happen. And then it all just flowed out, and it came together, and I was so pleasantly surprised with how well everything fit. That was a real gift to me.
Yeah, it pays off really well. Well, Liz, we only have, we like to keep you just for about 30 minutes, but I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to hear what you are currently watching, reading, and listening to right now, because we're always looking for new recommendations.
Yeah, okay, so let's see. I am currently watching, currently I'm watching a whole lot of Hallmark movies, Hallmark Christmas movies. I don't know if there are other fans there, but I can't get enough of them. So I'm like probably getting one a day in at least. Let's see, I'm listening to a whole lot of Queen. I just went and saw Bohemian Rhapsody, the Freddie Mercury biopic, and so it got me hooked on Queen music again, and so I'm listening to a lot of that. And what am I currently reading? Right now, I just started The Christmas Heirloom which is like 4 short novellas in one. And they're all Christmas stories tied to the same family. And so that's what I'm reading right now.
That's awesome. Well, and Liz, that reminds me that you just did an anthology as well of a story that spans multiple, or not a story, but about. Oh no, I'm sorry. We're talking about the Christmas heirloom. I apologize. Don't listen to me.
No problem.
There's another Liz Johnson out there that's not named Liz Johnson that is disguised as you. I apologize. Well, Liz,
that's so fun. Well, I should read her stuff.
well, I wanted to
watch Liz. Oh, sorry, Gwen. I had a quick question.
Yeah,
Since Liz has been watching all the Hallmark movies, is there one of your books, or which of your books would you most like to see brought to the screen, if it ever could?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's such a great question. Well, I this week actually just released a Christmas novella. It's a standalone Prince Edward Island Christmas novella, and it's well, I guess it's not really a standalone. It's part of the Prince Edward Island Dreams series, but I think it would make a lovely Hallmark movie. It's the hero and heroine snowed in at Christmas at the inn. What's not to love about that? Mm-hmm. So I would think that would make for a great Hallmark movie. Really, I think The Red Door Inn is still the story of my heart, and so to see that on the big screen would be incredible. Yeah. Or the balloon screen. I'm not picky.
Do you think that they're kind of picking off that? Do you think that there's one of your books that would lend itself really well to being a series versus just a standalone film?
Well, yeah. I mean, I've always thought that the Red Door Inn series, like, not just the books, but you could develop all sorts of new characters coming through and staying at the inn and experiencing healing, and I think that those would make for a really fun television series. I would definitely watch that.
Well, I know I've been dominating the conversation, but do you guys have any other questions over there?
So how many books are you hoping to be in the new Georgia series?
Oh, yeah. So we're expecting 3 books in that series right now. So the first book being A Sparkle of Silver. The second book will come out in August, and it's called A Glitter of Gold. And then my editors was asking me for the first chapter in book 3, and I was like, "You've got to be kidding me! I haven't even started. I have no idea what it's going to be about." But I think that book 3 will be set in Savannah. Book 2 is set in Savannah, Georgia, and deals with pirates and has historical journals to uncover, much like A Sparkle of Silver. And so then book 3 will also be set in Savannah, and I'm hoping to, I haven't figured out yet exactly how it's all going to tie together, but I'm really hoping to get to talk about the Civil War era smuggling, through the blockade into Georgia during the Civil War. So I think that would be the historical element if I can figure that out.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really cool. Is there one genre that you haven't written yet that you'd love to write?
Well, I wrote a historical romance novella for a collection. It came out, I think it came out in 2010, called A Log Cabin Christmas. And I loved writing that historical romance, and I would love to write a full-on historical romance. I'm terrified about the amount of research that requires, because even a small bit of history woven into contemporary times that requires a lot of research. And so I think I would really love to write, like a Civil War era story, but I'm terribly intimidated by that.
Yeah, we can't just use Wikipedia, unfortunately.
I know.
It would be so much easier.
If only. Yes. Yes.
Well, Liz, I wanted to make sure that you had a chance. We always love to ask our authors if you'd like to ask our group a question, if there's anything you're curious to know about us.
Yeah, so I'm curious, how many ladies are there tonight, and how long have you guys been meeting together with this group?
So there are about 8 of us here at Sam's house, and then Glenn, you'll have to do how long a group, because I've only been here for, I think, 5 years, but I don't know how long the group's been meeting.
So the book club started in 1995 with a tea group, and then we started having regular book club meetings that weren't just monthly, probably in like 2007. I want to say like right after. No, I guess it was still when I was in college. So for a while, for a good chunk of time, yeah. And it's really great because we've been able to grow it from a tea group that met once a month where we talk about books and just kind of a reason to get away from our families, to now we have a book club that meets every single week.
Every week? Oh my word! Wow! And what are some of your favorite genres to read?
Oh, that's a tough question. You guys have to answer that one.
Right now, I'm all about the historicals. I won't leave 1880s London or Scotland.
Oh, that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Historicals, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a big mix here. I mean, I know I'm listening to a historical in the car, but I've been reading urban fantasy and then some paranormal and contemporary, and it's kind of all over the place. And I even have a nonfiction set to the side that I need to read, which is very unusual for me.
Oh, that's great.
Right, god awful young adult books.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I have a YA fantasy that I'm waiting to read, but I'm dreading it also because that means it's the end of the series, and I don't want it to be over.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, my Kindle, I can't throw it across the room.
Oh, yeah, you can't throw the Kindles across the room, no.
Yeah, you kind of read all over the map here.
Yeah. Which keeps it interesting.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Well, Liz,
That's
thank
great.
you so much for chatting with us tonight. I wanted to make sure you had a chance to let us know where we can find out more information about you, and then also stay in touch with you after our book club finishes tonight.
Oh, certainly. I would love that. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. What a treat and delight to get to talk to book lovers, and especially a group like you who's been around for so long. That's so amazing, and I love that. I have all my book information is on my website at lizjohnsonbooks.com. And I don't blog there anymore, but I do keep it up to date with new releases, and I have a whole page just for giveaways, and I'm actually kicking off a big giveaway starting on Saturday. So if y'all get a chance to stop by in the next week or two, you can enter into the 12 Days of Christmas giveaway. And then on social media, I spend a lot of time on Facebook. I'm on Liz Johnson Books there as well. So, and then Twitter and Instagram, I'm also Liz Johnson Books. So pretty easy all the way across the board.
Easy to find you. That's exactly how we like our authors.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I will let you guys have a great rest of your night. And Liz, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, totally my pleasure. Thank you guys. You guys have a great evening.
I'd like to extend my thanks again to Liz Johnson for joining me today. You can find A Sparkle of Silver anywhere books are sold. Thank you also to Revell Books and Bethany House for their continued support of the podcast. Make sure you stop by freshfiction.com to find out more about Liz Johnson and other Revell Books and Bethany House authors. And until next time, happy reading.